So in the previous lecture, we installed Flutter and Android Studio so that we can build Android apps with Flutter. Now in this lecture, we'll create a Flutter project and see how we can then edit the code and how we can run this Flutter app that will be in that project on our emulator. And for this, we go back to this command prompt. In there, we have this Flutter command, which we can now use, and we can also use it to create new projects. Now for this, you first of all should navigate inside of this command prompt into the folder where you want to create your project. And you can use the cd command for that, which stands for change directory. And here you could, for example, cd into a folder named development if you have such a folder. I did create that folder before in my user folder. And then in that development folder, you can cd into subfolders. Now, I don't have any subfolders yet. So what I'll quickly do is in Explorer, I'll go into that folder, create a new folder there, which I'll name projects. Name is up to you. And then here, back in the command prompt, I can navigate into this projects folder by typing cd proj, and then I hit tab for auto completion. And now I'm in that path where I want to create my new Flutter folder. And you should use some global path like this. Now, once you have that folder, you can use the Flutter command again, but now we'll run flutter create to create a new project. And then when you use that command, which is exposed by Flutter, you need to give your project a name. And I'll name it first_app here. You should use a name that is something like this, that does not contain any white space, no dashes, no dots, instead underscores if you have multiple words which you want to separate. And then you can hit enter, and this will now create a brand new Flutter project in there. Hence in the Explorer in the projects folder, I now have this first app folder. And now we want to open that with some tool that allows us to view and edit the code. We could use Android Studio for that, but since it's a bit heavy and a bit slow in my opinion, I will use a different tool which has great Flutter support, and that's Visual Studio Code. You can search for vscode to find code.visualstudio.com. And vscode is a free IDE, a free code editor provided by Microsoft, which you can download for all operating systems, which allows you to edit code, not just Flutter code, but a lot of other programming languages and frameworks as well. But it does have great Flutter support as well. So here I'll just download it. And then once that download finished, I'll execute this installer, which it gives me. Accept the agreement, use the default location, keep all the other defaults, and make sure it's added to your path. This here is in German, but it basically says that it's added to the path variable. So I'll keep that and then install it. And now this will install this Visual Studio Code tool on our system, which we can use for editing code. So let's wait for this to finish, and then we can also start it right away. And if you start it, you see something like this, a little starting screen where you can also choose a theme, and I'll go with the dark theme. You can also edit this if you go to File, Preferences, and then Color Theme. Here you can also switch the theme, and I'll use Dark Plus. Close this. And then, before we open the project, we'll also install a couple of extensions. Because a great feature of Visual Studio Code is that it has built-in extensions support, and extensions are basically just plugins which you can install into Visual Studio Code. So for that, we can go to View, Extensions, or use this shortcut here, or click on Extensions here on the left. And then there are a couple of extensions you should install. Most importantly, you want to search for Flutter here and install this Flutter extension. This helps you with writing Flutter code and provides great support whilst you are writing Flutter code. So inside of this editor, you'll then get great support for Flutter. This also installed a Dart extension automatically, which will help with Dart code in general, and Flutter uses Dart, as you learned. And last but not least, I'll search for material icon, which is totally optional, but which changes the look of the file icons. And I like that look. I'm using it throughout this course. And if you want it too, you can install this material icon theme here to get that icon look. And then in this dropdown which opens, I'll select material icon theme to set my icon look to it. Click activate here as well. Okay, so now I got all these things installed. Now we can open our newly created Flutter project with Visual Studio Code. And for that here, under File, I'll choose Open Folder, and then go into the Development folder, Projects, and select this first app folder, the entire folder, and choose that folder. And then here, I'm prompted whether I want to trust this folder, and I'll choose Yes here. I'll also accept the recommended VS Code settings for Dart and Flutter and click on Yes here as well. Now here, we got this Flutter project opened up in Visual Studio Code. Now, the starting project you get and the exact files and folders you have in there could vary over time, and therefore, to ensure that we're all on the same page, attached you find my pubspec.yaml file, so this file here, and my main.dart file in the lib folder, and you should replace your content in the lib folder with my main.dart file. So if you have more folders and files in the lib folder, delete them all and use my attached main.dart file and drag it into this lib folder, and replace your pubspec YAML file with mine. With that, we simply ensure that you have exactly the same starting configuration and project as I do, and you get the same output as I do. And with that, we got this set up, and we can now run this project here, and of course also edit it. Now I'll walk through the different folders and files and what we have here in the next course section, so I'll ignore it for now. And instead I want to show you how you can run such a Flutter project as an Android app here on this Android emulator, which we have up and running. And this can be done by going to Terminal here and clicking on New Terminal in the VS Code menu here. And this is your system command prompt just integrated into VS Code. The great thing about that is that we can run commands in it without leaving our project here and without leaving our code. So we can have multiple things on the same screen. And in here, what you can now do to run your application on this emulator is you can run flutter run, just make sure that this emulator is up and running. And then flutter run is a command that will take your Flutter code, convert it to machine code for Android in this case, since we have an Android emulator up and running, and run that Android app on that emulator. And later in the course, you will also learn how to run it on real devices and how to build for different platforms. Very important, you need to run it inside of your project. That's why I'm using this integrated terminal, because this integrated terminal will automatically be navigated into this Flutter project, so that this command is executed from inside that project. And if you now hit enter, this will do what I just explained. It will build your Flutter project as an Android app and then run it on that Android emulator. Now, the first time you execute this can take a bit longer, so definitely give this some time, but eventually it should be done, and then start this Flutter app as an Android app, as a native Android app on this Android simulator. So let's wait for that to finish. And by the way, this will be quite slow and take some time the first time you do this. Subsequent changes and restarts will be faster, so no worries about that. And now here for me it's crashing actually. It's crashing with this error message that Kotlin could not find the required JDK tools. If you're not getting this, perfect. If you are getting it, what you have to do is Google for JDK 8 and you should find this page on oracle.com. And then there, pick the download version for your system, in my case, Windows. Now here we can then download this, and unfortunately we have to create an account here. It's free, but we have to do that. And once you did create that account and then sign in on this page, the download will start of this JDK tool, which we now need to fix this error, which we got during building this Android app with Flutter here. So let's wait for this download to finish. And then we can simply walk through this installer, keep all the defaults here, and install this Java development kit, which Android needs under the hood. And you might not need that because in some installations this is set up correctly right from the start. For me here it wasn't. I'll also confirm the defaults here and install Java itself and make sure that all these tools are installed here. And once this was installed successfully, you can go back and you can run Flutter run again. And now this time it should succeed here and it should build this application. And it now also sends this application to this Android emulator, which is up and running here. And here you can now play around with this starting app, which you get if you use my attached files, the main.dart file and the pubspec.yaml file as instructed earlier. And this is now our Flutter project, our Flutter app running as a native Android app on this Android simulator. And now that this is up and running, with that Flutter run process, which is a process that is still running, we can actually now go into one of our code files here and then search that line where counter ++ is executed, line 58, and change that a little bit. Now, by the way, I will explain all that code and how Dart and Flutter work throughout this entire course. For the moment, we'll just make a quick change here and change line 58 to say _counter equals _counter +2. If you then save this file by pressing Ctrl S, so that you don't have this bullet next to the file name anymore, then you don't have to run Flutter run again to see this change in the running app. But instead, with this ongoing process that was started by executing Flutter run, we can now press R to perform a so-called hot reload, which basically means that our updated code is injected into this running app, which is a quick way of seeing changes without restarting everything. So therefore now, if I press R, this hot reload is performed, and now if I click the plus here, this counter changes by 2 instead of 1 as before, because of this code change, which is reflected by this hot reload. Alternatively, you can also perform a so-called hot restart by pressing Shift R, which will then also still be quicker than running Flutter run again, but which will restart that app that's running on the emulator, which is why now the counter is reset to 0. And that's how we could run our application here. Now I'm saying could, because whilst this works, it can be a bit annoying that we have to press R or Shift R all the time. Therefore, I'll quit this running Flutter run process by pressing Ctrl C here in this terminal and confirming it with Y. And I'll close this terminal. Because since we installed that Flutter extension earlier, we also have a different way of running our projects, our Flutter projects, as apps on emulators. And that will be the way I use throughout this course. We can go to Run and then choose Run without debugging. Later in the course, we will also dive into debugging, but for now, let's run it without debugging. And this now also runs Flutter run under the hood, but we don't see it here. We don't actively have to run this. We still get a terminal window here, but that's now actually just a little output window, which shows info messages and possible warnings to us. And then we get prompted whether we want to open the Dart DevTools. I'll not do that here. We will see them later, so I'll choose not now for now. And again, we'll have our app here on this emulator. But now we have this control panel up here where we also could perform a hot reload or a hot restart by clicking on these buttons or using the shortcuts which you see here. And we can always stop this running process by pressing this stop button. But the great thing is that if you start your app like this, you don't even have to use the hot reload button. If I change my code, for example to say +3, and I then save this, it will automatically perform this hot reload. So it detects file changes, so whenever we save a changed file, and it will automatically update the running app here. And that's of course even more convenient than manually triggering those updates with R or Shift R. And therefore that's how I will run my apps. And if you're done for the day, you can always stop this process, and then the app is shut down on the emulator, and if you want to work on it again, you just start this again. And that's what we'll do throughout the course. And of course, in the course, I will then also explain all that code and how Flutter and Dart work. Now, feel free to also tweak the appearance of Visual Studio Code here with the Appearance menu. You can show and hide the sidebars and various other areas so that you like your editor. So make sure you tweak it like that. And then, therefore, we are now done and we can continue. Now, I will say that throughout the rest of the course, I am working on Mac, but the code you write is exactly the same, so it won't make a difference for you. And I also will be using the Android emulator throughout the course, so that's exactly the same for you, also if you use Windows. So just because I'm using Mac in the next lectures and in this entire course does not mean that you need to change anything or that you can't follow along. You can follow along just fine because the code will be the same.